one of a series of short talks about why it is very difficult for me and for many people in the West to understand China. And I've gone through some of the fundamental differences between individualism and group-based, monotheistic, polytheistic systems and so on. Today I want to talk about another kind of difficulty. This is based on a chapter in my book on understanding the Chinese A to Z, which looks at ignorance and prejudice. Here I'm looking at the history of the Western view of China. For a long time, in other words, from the time of Marco Polo in the 13th century right through to the early 19th century, the West regarded China with a great deal of awe and often with a great deal of appreciation. It was known as a great, advanced, technologically sophisticated, immensely impressive in its art and other fields. And so people like the Enlightenment thinkers, most of them, looked to China, Voltaire and others, as a model not only of art and literature, but also of government, a very impressive political system. Then in the early 19th century, the West's technological superiority began to develop, and it began to look at China as stuck, as not advancing, and increasingly as backward and needing Western interference or advice to bring it up to date. And so you had a tragedy developing, particularly with the two opium wars in the 19th century, when the Chinese were humiliated and made to pay huge reparations. And that 2 centuries almost of humiliation, as the Chinese regard them, continued from the 1820s, 30s, right up until towards the end of the 20th century. And the stereotype of China changed from this admiration to looking at China as really an epitome of all that was bad in the world. And it's rather horribly summarized in this picture you see of the octopus. This is the Chinese octopus, and I will tell you about the tentacles which enwrap us, or will if we are not careful. This was a cartoon which was in an Australian newspaper in the 1880s by a British cartoonist, and it depicted this monster which was going to encircle us if we weren't careful, and it elaborated the various tentacles. The first one, which was shown in that picture on the other side, was cheap labor. In the picture you have an honest American coming back, unable to feed his family, because on the other side you have all these Chinese living in a cellar somewhere, giving their labor for nothing and outmaneuvering the Americans. Now that stereotype of cheap labor taking away our jobs is pretty familiar to us now. It's exactly the stereotypes which you often get in Western media, and particularly American political thought. The Chinese cheat by paying their workers so little, and that was one of the tentacles. A second tentacle, which was also 2 more tentacles, because this was really a horrific aspect, it was thought, of China, was gambling and opium. Now, the opium accusation, of course, the Chinese did take opium, as did most people, including Westerners, but to call them as a threat in terms of opium when you were forcing opium on them through your trading systems and making them buy your opium is a bit rich. But this was one of the accusations. They were just lying around smoking or inhaling opium. And they were also terrible gamblers. They would gamble day and night, gamble away their wives, their houses, even parts of their bodies. And this was something which Westerners, and many of the depictions were by missionaries and others, was horrific. Now, it is absolutely true that mahjong and other games of gambling are very popular in China, and the Chinese do love to gamble, as do many people in the West too. So it was a little overdone. Another horrific aspect of the Chinese, according to this octopus, was their immorality. In the West, in Christianity, you have an idea that sex and marriage go together. You don't have sex before marriage, and you don't have sex with people outside the marriage, though this is not exactly carried out everywhere and over time. But that was the ideal. In China, there was no association of sex with sin. You didn't go to hell because you had bad sexual relations, as you might do in Christianity. Sex was a pretty neutral kind of activity, and therefore there was very little association of sex with morality. And this to the West was appalling. For example, you had widespread prostitution, though again one should note that much of that was to serve Western sailors and traders in the port cities, so we created the thing we hated, but also things like second junior wives, that the Chinese were prepared to have a senior wife and then have several other women concubines, and that was horrific to Western morality. So they were an immoral people. They were also an extremely corrupt people. That is to say, there's another tentacle called bribery, and here you have the idea that to get anything done in China you have to bribe them, that people are paid so little or for other reasons they need to be encouraged by a backhander. Now, this again is rather odd, because much of the bribery was done by Westerners to get their businesses achieved, and one of the things that come out of much of the literature of Western businesses and missionaries in China is how incredibly honest and dependable the Chinese were. The British and other traders could have done nothing in China without the assistance of the comprador, the fixers from the Chinese side, who were completely trusted because the Westerners didn't speak Chinese. But it is true that, as in all developing countries, and certainly in most of the West until very recently, things were not straightforward. There was a black economy, and in order to oil the wheels, to get through the bureaucracy, to get things done, you had to pay. And this was true in the past, but now it's put about that, if you want to get on with in Chinese business, you have to find the right people and fix them. And that stereotype continues, though the vast efforts recently of the Chinese government to crack down on all forms of bribery and corruption is pretty notable and separates it off from most developing or developed countries. A fourth kind of tentacle was disease. China was a vast country, and various diseases like bubonic plague was endemic in the Central Asian parts of China and Central Asia, and there were other plagues which often seemed to spread away from China, out of China, like cholera and so on. And this was a horrific aspect, and again we find the same tropes, as they say, the same ideas, which were confirmed horribly by the COVID epidemic, which allegedly started in Wuhan and spread around the world. So China is dangerous we tended to forget that many of the worst diseases, like venereal diseases and AIDS, and even the influenza epidemic, which killed more people as a proportion of the world population than COVID, and originated in America in the early 20th century, we forget that many of these diseases came from us, and we look at their horrible diseases and say what a shambles it is. And then the final and eighth tentacle was customs robbery. Now you can see this octopus was drawn by someone who was in correspondence with traders, because the idea was that the Chinese had the gall, when they imported and exported Western goods, to actually put customs duties on them. The duties were very small, but a lot of effort was put into trying to get customs freedom and free ports and the rest of it. So customs robbery, fixing the economic system to the benefit of Chinese traders, was another tentacle. And of course this also continues in much of the argument against China now. Now the point of all this is that these stereotypes, which rose to a crescendo around the time that this drawing was made, because the Americans felt that they were being threatened by the influx of Chinese, who of course were quite useful because they built the American railway system, railroads among other things, sweated labor, etc. But on the other hand, you hated them and occasionally killed numbers of them in massacres in America and elsewhere. But all the same, we hated them, and these were the reason we hated them. And those stereotypes, we may think, oh well, that was the Victorian period, but stereotypes once established are very difficult to get rid of. And so when reading about the representations of China, one has to remember the octopus and the tentacles. Thank you.